to Nell, and Jeremy to Nell. Streaming to you recorded from Seattle, Washington. Here we go.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Plowline podcast. I'm very excited about the conversation we're going to be having today. Helen and Dave Edwards are co-founders of the Artificiality Institute, a nonprofit research organization exploring what it takes to stay human in a world shaped by AI. For more than a decade, they've studied how AI changes the way people think, decide, and relate to each other. Their work focuses on a central question. When intelligence becomes something we share, how do we remain the authors of our own minds? They host the Artificiality Summit in Bend, Oregon, and serve as visiting researchers at UC Berkeley's Center for Human Capable AI. Helen previously led major technology systems in critical infrastructure, and Dave spent years building creative tools at Apple and investing in emerging technologies. Together, at Artificiality, they explore how to live, work, and remain fully human alongside artificial intelligence. Welcome both, Dave and Helen. We're so glad to have you here. Let's get started.
Morning. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, glad to have you. So I came across your content on YouTube and reached out, and you had sent me a couple of articles that are available on your website. And we're going to dive into those a little bit, but give me an idea of how you got into this in the first place.
Well, that was a decade ago, and I had been working with a startup in Silicon Valley that was very early in some machine learning technology and what we would call now sort of predictive analytics, I guess, but early AI. In terms of the kind of way we think about AI now, right off the back of the deep learning revolution. But we got into this in 2016 because we have 5 kids, and the 2 oldest were starting to think about what they were going to do in college. And this was when there was sort of those first headlines of job destruction from AI. And they said, well, why go to college? What am I going to do in college? The robots are going to do everything. And we didn't have a good answer. In fact, we didn't have any answer. So we decided to do the study ourselves. And so we essentially, in our own way, reproduced the Oxford study and did one that was sort of similar to between that and the McKinsey study that was done at the time. And we learned an awful lot modeling that. Dave nearly broke Excel trying to get that to work. And where we got to in 2016 was interesting when we look back on it with the benefit of hindsight, that we realized in 2016 that the business case for advanced AI would be about replacing humans from a labor perspective. And we sort of realized that at that kind of deep granular level of, wow, if machines could do this, then what's a human going to do? And but in that research, there was some really clear signals about what humans are particularly good at, and the ability to handle the unpredictable. That remains true today, in the sense that we still don't have general intelligence that can really deeply operate outside its training data. This could be a year where that changes in the coding environment with self-replicating code, but we're not there yet, and we're certainly not there for truly creative human ingenuity, replacing that. We had sort of insights in various categories, places where that unpredictability is particularly prevalent, microbiology, ecology, these sorts of places where the world is deeply complex and profoundly unpredictable and unknowable. where emergence happens, you from a complexity perspective. But having said that, where we're at today is quite a different place than 2016 because language models are fundamentally different than the kind of AI that we had in 2016. And the Transformer paper hadn't even been written then. And so what we have now is AI that has learned deep structures of the world, primarily through language in terms of what most people experience with chatbots, but through other structures as well, like whether it be protein folding or weather or so we have AI that's is a very different kind of beast than it was then, and it's much more cultural. And so when we talk about co-evolving with AI, we're not talking about our genetics particularly changing straight away. It's nothing like that. Right. We're not talking about being a different species. We're talking about cultural co-evolution, which is faster than genetic evolution. And so the way that we think about AI now is much more of a subtle and nuanced story about shared cognition, shared cultural artifacts, different kinds of feedback loops that happen. And that takes us to a place where we sort of circle back to where we started and why we started, which is what the hell are we going to do as humans with this cognitive technology that is now so deeply sort of intertwined with our own cognition. And it all kind of starts from that point. And our unpredictable, complex systems are still complemented more by machines than replaced by. But nevertheless, we have an entirely different perspective on the kind of knowledge that we can develop and what we can do. So that's kind of where we land. Ironically, really none of those kids actually use AI, and they did choose careers that are complemented rather than replaced by AI. So we feel like we did a bit of our job there.
Yeah, I don't think any of them actually read the research that we put out back then, but actually they've all fallen into careers which followed that advice in 2016.
They pretty much did like every single category.
Yeah. I think there's also an important part of our perspective, which is taking quite a long-term view about how where this technology has come from and where it might go to, and the moment we're in. And so, for people who are sort of engaging with this topic, there is a very robust debate about how good this technology is, whether it's going to destroy humanity, save it, whether it's going to destroy learning or save it, whether it's going to do creativity, all of these different topics. And those are all really valuable and important questions to ask. We think about it over quite a longer period of time than most, in that a lot of that dialogue is based on what the experience is of the tool today, which is different from what it was like a month ago, because some new version came out that did something spectacular, and there's going to be different from what it's going to be in a month from now. But people tend to take a very sort of narrow view of, well, the chatbot as at the AI in the instantiation that we have, which is a chat system, which is not something that I think will actually really exist in its current, as it currently exists in some number of months or years. And so they sort of think about it as, well, this is what it can do today. And so is it valuable to me? Is it valuable to my organization? Is it destructive to me? Is it destructive to my organization? And I like to sort of bring up the comparison that, to me, AI is sort of at the phase of Netscape Navigator when you had to go get it on a CD-ROM disk. Right?
Yeah.
And for those listeners who are old enough to remember, you used to have to go to a store and buy a CD-ROM that had, the actual executable for Netscape Navigator. You brought it home, and if your machine even had a CD-ROM drive, which now for most young people is sort of something that they don't even remember ever having either, it's like an 8-track to, Gen Xers.
Right.
And so you had to put it in, you had to install it. You then had to go through this, routine of trying to figure out how to get online. Then you went to a website and you hoped that the website was the website you wanted because we hadn't created the security technology so that it couldn't be spoofed on the way. I mean,
Yep.
it was a total disaster. Looking back on it, that's kind of where we are today. We're going to
Yeah.
look back on this phase right now and feel like it was kind of a disaster. So the
Yeah.
question of what this does for us individually, collectively, in society, it's important to at least consider what might happen, what might come, how we might create this, and how we might do things in different ways. The current path is not fixed and it's not inevitable.
Yeah. Yeah, it isn't. And I think that, we are early in this game. And your Netscape Navigator is a very good analogy. Once we're on the other side of this, right, we'll look back and be able to be like, yeah, that checks. At the moment, the clunkiness of the internet, in the early 1990s, that clunkiness isn't there. It's incredibly, for a fledgling AI system that is complex, but not quite complex adaptive at the moment. It's I mean, it's talking to you,
Oh, it definitely is. And it's quite different because in what we sort of consider the dawn of the commercial internet, summer of 1995, when Netscape went public, there were 9 million people online.
Yeah.
That's it, right? So the exposure to this new thing was very limited. It was limited only to the really early adopters. It was mostly people who were in the industry themselves. So there was a very limited sort of question. But at the same time, there was this sort of, it was going to destroy everything. It was going to save everything. It was going to make information free. It was going to destroy that, like all of the same sort of dialogue. But
Mm-hmm.
that dialogue was much more constrained and contained because there were so few people exposed. This
Yeah.
is different. You
Mm-hmm.
have whatever it is, several hundred million daily users or monthly users of these tools, depending on which tool you're looking at and what period of time. So you have an extraordinary amount of usage and number of people that are exposed at this very sort of difficult, sort of clunky time. So for anybody who's listening who has an experience that they feel is difficult, we get it. If they feel like they have an experience that is different from what they hear and the promises that are being sold to them, we hear it, which is why we do what we do. We study it to understand the experience of people. We gather people through our community, which is a digital community, which is free and open to people. Welcome to find a link to it on our website. It's pretty simple. And that's how we bring people together to sort of share this and bring some humanity to this conversation.
And I actually think it is clunky. I think it's very clunky,
Yeah.
and but the clunkiness manifests differently. The actual process of firing up ChatGPT or Claude or whatever or Gemini, and starting a conversation, that's not clunky. That's completely frictionless
Mm-hmm.
because it's language and
Right.
it's intuitive and we understand it. And there's some people who see that text box and they kind of freak out and they don't really know what to do. And you have to sort of say, ask it a question. You're really in the very, very beginner. But, it's intuitive. It's a language. Where it's clunky is in our own reaction to it, where it can be very clunky that you realize something happened to you well after it actually happened, and you have to sort of back up yourself and realize, I didn't realize that I picked up that idea from AI and I just propagated it through everything. It's obviously clunky with hallucinations.
Yes.
They're getting less, but that clunkiness that happens when you realize that you accidentally put something on a slide that you didn't quite check. That's a different kind of clunkiness. It's clunky in the sense that we're in danger of being utterly overrun by AI slop, and AI slop is making humans sloppy. I was reading one of those sort of daily emails that I read every day, and an AI one, and they were talking about a study that came out yesterday that sort of blew up. Now, it was a study that was conducted in Berkeley at the Haas School of Business, and the article was reported in the Harvard Business Review, but the writers of the newsletter called it Harvard research. It's like, that's just sloppy. That's just sloppy. That's showing that AI is writing their newsletter and they're going through putting links in, or maybe they've got an agent doing that for them. But that's sloppy. That's sloppy writing. And as a journalist, we worked in a newsroom for a few years. That's like really not cool. But so that clunkiness is propagating through everything. And then we have the really big clunkiness that matters most, which is what is this doing to our cognition? And what is this doing to the way that we show up to others? So there's a lot of clunkiness that we observe in our work and in the research and the data where people don't know how to present their thinking anymore to other people, because part of it is AI and part of it is them. And depending on what role they've put AI into, they perceive that differently.
Yeah.
It changes their identity. It changes their sense of what they're able to get their head around and be a master in and be an expert in, or even dabble in. And the way that they show up to others changes completely. So the clunkiness, the biggest clunkiness, is in team dynamics, where people are somewhere between rejecting and overwhelmed and excited and blown away and running ahead and leaving others behind. The full gambit, right?
Yep.
And so it's very different than, it was clunky that you didn't really know, the internet's dialing up. But the real clunkiness is in here, in our own minds and how we relate to other people. And the products aren't supporting that clunkiness particularly well.
Yeah, I that was one of the things I found particularly interesting in your study, which is available on your website, How We Think and Live with AI, Early Pattern and Human Adaptation. I believe this was done with 1,000 participants. Is that correct? Is this the early one?
Yeah, this is the first one.
Okay.
That was published back in June, July, I think, 2025. More than 1,000 people over hundreds of hours, a lot of that based in the work that we've been doing since ChatGPT came out. And we were working in data-driven decision-making. And once we had AI in this form, we pivoted to be talking much more about how to incorporate AI into those decision-making processes. So through many, many workshops and through some grounded interviews and some digital ethnography, we developed this theory. And it's really kind of standing up nicely. The satisfying part of it is, for a lot of people, it is massively explanatory. It names feelings for them that they didn't have a name for. They couldn't put language around, and they read it and they go, oh, that's me. And that is, I think, very, very indicative that there's something actually going on here.
Yeah. I can read the executive summary, but can you state your kind of theoretical framework?
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah.
So I want to start with this initial challenge, which is this any different than any technology we've had in the past? So, and there's
I think unequivocally it is.
Well, and it's really important to understand why that question is so important. We talk about crows using tools or those sorts of things. When I was growing up, one of the great schisms for human exceptionalism was we're the only ones who use tools.
Right.
And I found it very upsetting to find that crows use tools. And then I found it really, really exciting to find that crows use tools.
I'm kind of worried about the crows using tools against me. That's my problem.
Well, we have a lot of crows.
I know.
And I think they will.
And if you worry about crows, you got to really worry about ravens.
I know.
Yeah, you do.
And I'm be thinking about that for the rest of the universe.
But this is really important stuff, because it's very human to use technology and to advance ourselves with technology and to put cognition outside of our head. Very famous essay written by Andy Clark and David Chalmers in, I think, 96, something like that, called The Extended Mind. And so when we put our thinking out into the world with a pen and paper or with a laptop or with an app or with AI, we are doing something that's actually very natural for humans. It is sort of evolutionary. We have an evolutionary imperative to make everything more efficient. So we're going to do that. But the question is AI different? And we've always lent on the angle of, yes, we think it's different. Why? Because people tell us it's different. So let's start there. And even if it's not different, the stakes are so high from an evolutionary perspective, from a co-evolutionary perspective, that this is worth studying. So that was the original premise. Let's take the cautionary principle and start looking at this from the perspective of answering that question. And so to do that, you have to really bring in scholarship from human-computer interaction and from the social sciences and the cognitive sciences and neuroscience. So, and philosophy. So we started with that premise and built the advisors around that, and then looked at what's the data telling us. And at the point when we published that paper, the data was telling us three things from a grounded observational perspective. The first one is this might be different. We don't really know why. It could be that there's something profoundly different about having all of humanity's internet knowledge compressed into 24/7 always available conversation.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing. The second thing was that people go through a journey. There's a 5 states that people go through when they encounter AI. They first have a recognition moment where they go, whoa, I didn't know I could do this. And that could be, I didn't know I could do this, or I didn't know I could do this. There's a valence there. People stay in that recognition phase for quite a while. They calibrate trust, they move around, they play with it. We've all made a haiku, and then we've all, tried to build a table or a spreadsheet or something like that, or a recipe, or upload it, help me fix this bicycle wheel, those kinds
a workout plan, a diet plan.
All of those kinds of things, cleaning up the emails, whatever.
Yeah.
And then that calibration phase eventually gives way to an integration phase where it becomes very seamless. It's about productivity. It's about, this makes my day easier, that kind of thing. Then there's a subtle shift moving into a state called blurring. And that blurring state is where you just sort of can't quite tell where you end and the AI begins, and it's a complex state, and a lot sort of hangs off of that. But eventually something breaks. It'll always break. There's a trust break, there's something gets imposed from the outside, and you move into a fracture zone. And oftentimes that's pretty negative from an affect perspective. It doesn't feel very good. It's emotionally not great. But sometimes it is positive. But the overwhelming positive part is when you move out of fracture into the fifth state of reconstruction, and you recalibrate, you rebuild the relationship, you rebuild expectations. Now, importantly, this isn't linear. It's highly, non-linear. People can move around. You can be in a different state for one thing versus another. You can move, using it for health is very different than using it for, how do I talk to my husband about something versus I need to just get this AI agent up and running, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
What's interesting about this is that this isn't that different from other human experiences. There's a lot of scholarship about how colonialization followed this kind of path. I think about it as when I go and visit a country I've never been to and I don't speak the language, I go through all of those 5. Just learning how to take public transport. This is so different, like how do I get through this turnstile? And
driving
then
on the other side of the road.
You get the vibe, you sort of get into it, and then you don't know, you lose track of the fact that it just becomes so intuitive that you forget that it was so foreign at the start, and then something happens. You lose the metro card, and you have to start again, and you can't talk to anyone about it, and you're embarrassed because you're stuck on one side of the turnstile and you can't get through, and you're holding everyone up. That's your fracture point. And then you realize, I have to recalibrate, and I have to be more humble about what I do and I don't know. So that's nothing too different.
I think that your point there is is a good point to pause, because the analogy you're using is one of traveling someplace foreign, traveling someplace new, new territory, new ground. That's a great analogy for exactly what's happening here. This is more than just, this is more than just a simple new tool. This is new territory. This is new ground, and it's emergent. It's unfolding with every interaction that we have.
Yeah, you totally nailed it. So then the question is, what's driving that movement? How do we think about what these causal properties of this new terrain might be? And this is where I think the research gets interesting and more. There's more of a grounded question about this being really different. What came out of the research was 3 particular psychological traits. And I'm going to stick with for the purposes of this podcast, and stick with a more technical language.
Sure.
We have less technical language in our new book that's coming out chapter by chapter on at a more sort of general audience level, but I'll stick with the technical language. So the first is what we call cognitive permeability. And this is how much AI is inside your own reasoning, and how much the ideas that come from AI become your ideas. And this is sort of the easiest one for people to sort of wrap their head around, right? Because this happens all the time. You can feel it happening. That's a great idea. I'll take it. And we do that with humans as well. But there's something about it coming from this 24/7 compressed massive language model, where you're not just meeting one person who happens to be an expert. You're meeting, the gazillions of people who are experts, and they're telling you, here's a really good idea, and you take it.
That's right. Yeah.
So I think that's very, cognitive permeability is a very, very sort of grounded, important part of this that does feel different to people. The second one is identity coupling, and this is where your identity becomes bound with an AI. And this is a very deep phenomenon, and we saw it first in places where there were high emotional stakes in personal relationships. But it's certainly happening in professional settings as well, where people, there's a great story about an emergency room physician who is obviously very skilled at his job, and he's working with a family who don't speak English, and they have the woman who's a patient has a very complex pulmonary diagnosis, and I don't understand the details of this. Is kind of in the weeds of medicine, but the thing that seems obvious about what you do with someone who was having difficulty breathing and difficulty with some problem with a heart rate, the thing that seemed obvious was not obvious. There was a complexity with it, and he was having trouble explaining that, and they didn't have a translator available. So for the first time, he opened ChatGPT and had ChatGPT explain it. And the thing that mattered to him when he told the story was that he realized that ChatGPT did a way, way better job of explaining this. And this is a few cycles ago, back in, I guess it was 4 that everyone liked so much, that explaining it, that he had this sense of, what kind of doctor am I? And I can be a better doctor to people who don't speak English by using this tool. So that shift in his own sense of professional identity. And we're seeing this a lot with coders and programmers for sure.
Sure.
But it's happening all over the place. And it's a really important thing to understand. The third one is the most sort of, this is the one that is kind of the most profound intellectually, and it's called symbolic plasticity, which is kind of a mouthful. But what it means is that your symbols, the things that generate meaning for you, become very plastic. And it means that you're able to go into places that you never would have gone into before because they have new meaning for you. So the easiest example to sort of get your head around is how there are plenty of people now who never thought of themselves as coders, but now they're starting to code. and they didn't think that coding was a meaningful thing for them. It was something that was in a different profession. It came out with different language. The symbols of, Python were not their symbols, were not things they could understand. They had no meaning to them. What the hell is pandas, that kind of thing. And
Right.
now with coding tools and with vibe coding, but with things like Claude Code, they are not even necessarily feeling like they're coders, but they're able to make coding a meaningful part of what they do.
Yeah.
And this symbolic plasticity is very, very important because what it is a true extension of what we feel we're individually able to do. And it becomes causal, and it is the thing that starts to move you around these different states. It moves you
Yeah.
around this terrain because you're looking at it going, could I do that? Could I become someone who understands the social sciences and speaks in that language? Could I
Yeah.
be able to code something and be able to speak in that language? So it's different than identity. You're holding that separately. Of course, when it bonds with identity as well, when you shift your identity as well, that's a whole different ballgame.
Yeah.
But
These are
this-
also nonlinear.
very much.
they're moving in
And
with
they're
each other.
unpredictable. You can
Yeah.
get broken out of these at different times. So that's sort of where that particular paper sort of ends.
Yeah, I actually those three definitions drew me in right out of the gate. Mostly because I'm experiencing them myself, right? I am, and I've been very clear. You're adjacent to academia, and so the debate that is raging amongst academics right now. And I've been extraordinarily transparent. Teetering on breaking the policy that because the policy doesn't know what it is with AI, the use of AI within academia, and I'm using that transparency as an opportunity in order to foster conversation amongst amongst faculty and students, and it's working. And but the reality is that I went into this dissertation with 10 years of work and a background in systems theory in my master's, and so had a what I thought to be a fairly good, robust understanding. Both my professors and my interactions with artificial intelligence have expanded that considerably. And it's not just the expansion, it's the rapidity. It's how fast it's expanded it. And I made a comment on one of your YouTube videos a couple days ago that I've caught myself saying in chat, our dissertation. And I've had to pull myself back from that a bit because I'm like, this is a tool, man. This is a tool,
Yeah, that is one of the language markers for high identity coupling.
Yes.
And I have to watch for it too. Sometimes I do it deliberately because I do recognize when I'm deep in a conversation with, in this case, my tool of choice at the moment is Claude. And I'll be, we need to get this right or something like that. And it's that I'm saying it partly to me.
You,
right?
yeah, right. I got to do the checks and balance.
I'm also reminded of, this concept that one of the, most interesting members of our community brought up is that meaning is a negotiation. So we create meaning through negotiation. And so I think that there is a part of it being we or our, and people can reject the anthropomorphizing of a machine. That's fine. I hope they also reject the anthropomorphizing of their pets. I mean, because the thing is, we humans look for things, that are similar. I mean, which is common among many, if not all species. Everybody's, everyone's looking for somebody like them, whether it's a human or a fish or, a sparrow.
A fish?
Well, looking for something like them. That's why they travel around
You name
schools.
Right?
I never thought of myself as a fish.
No, I'm saying that fish look for other fish.
Oh, I
And
see. Sorry.
sparrows look for
Yeah.
other sparrows, and humans look for other humans. And we tend
Thank
to
you for
look the
explaining
things
that.
that
Yeah.
kind of feel like us. So when the
That's
dog
right.
looks at you in a particular way, you feel like it's loving you. Well, it has some form of something that's affection, I think, but it's not the same. They don't feel the same things we do because they're fundamentally different species. But we
Yeah, they're
tend to
wired.
look
They're
for
wired
that,
different.
and we anthropomorphize, and we do all of that. That's a natural thing. And so we're doing that with these machines as well. And
Yeah.
that is both can be healthy and unhealthy depending on how you think about it. And I think it is
Yes.
sort of a perspective thing. But meaning is something that we negotiate. We negotiate with other people. We negotiate it with our pets. I mean, we negotiate with dogs. When if you've got a cattle dog that's got to go off and herd, you're negotiating what that means, right? Together, you're doing that with these tools too. And so it's natural in language to be able to start using a plural pronoun in terms of the effort that you're creating and the thing that's being done, because that's just the way that we make sense of the world.
It is. Yeah.
And so I allow that to be kind of a thing that happens. I mean, I think there's it sort of ties to me where there's sort of Helen will get a bit of a chuckle out of this because I love alliteration and I love threes. So there's three M's here that I'm going to bring up. One is meaning, which is I think really important. The other thing that is important for people is the other two things that I think quite important when people try to get their heads around what AI is that the concept of a machine is fundamentally changed. Right. So
Well said.
we historically have created physical machines, whether, it could be a harvester or something, and it works or it doesn't. And if it doesn't work, you've got to fix it. It's got some sort of problem, but the whole point is that it works as advertised.
Yeah.
And that we did for 40 years with computers, we did the same thing. We made personal computers as machines, and they operated as they're supposed to. And if there was something wrong with it, we called it a bug and we got it fixed, So
Yes.
Excel calculates the same way every single time because it's operating as a machine
That's
to
right.
do that, right? We kind of transitioned into this weird middle ground when we started to use these machines as medium, right? So as we think about transmitting messages and meaning essentially among people. And so that started with, the history of media, going way back to when we first started to print things to, I'm thinking Marshall McLuhan kind of mindset here of media studies.
Yeah.
And all the way through to television and cable and all the crazy things that Neil Postman predicted. But now we had, it all started to come through the same computer. And so the computer itself became this blend of a machine and a medium, right? In terms
Yes.
of transmitting these messages. The difference that we're now getting into is that the machine is now creating the message.
Right.
Throughout all of media history and to all the different mediums we've ever created, the medium has shaped the message. I very much, believe Marshall McLuhan was quite prescient in that idea. But the medium never created the message itself.
Yeah.
And you can argue where that message comes from. It comes from the human history, blah, blah, blah. I mean, so my message comes through my accumulated human history too. But the reality is the machine's writing stuff to us and we're writing it back. And that is a completely different world than we've ever existed in.
Yes. Yeah, it is. So we got two M's there, right? We've got meaning, we got medium.
And machines.
And machines. And
Yes.
machines is your third.
Just because I have to have three, because
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, you nailed it. And I think, Postman didn't, Neil Postman didn't, I have a lot of fondness for that book of his, entertaining. Is it what, Entertaining Ourselves to Death?
Yep.
Is that it?
Fantastic.
Fantastic book.
And if anyone hasn't read it and you're interested in the kind of stuff I'm just talking about, it's extremely readable too. McLuhan, a little bit tougher, brilliant in his own right, but Postman is a great read.
It's totally approachable. It's a little locked in its time, which is what a lot of criticism that book gets when you try and draw it into this conversation. But I think his point is extraordinarily relevant even still.
Yeah. He saw what was happening with television, and the whole premise of Entertaining Ourselves to Death is that we were moving into a medium that was all about entertainment, which sort of, gave us an insight into what would eventually happen of, cable news and being all about entertainment. And you can pull that forward pretty well into the modern internet era and social media and all of that. he did not, he didn't live long enough to see all of this. I would love to, be able to have him, get his mind on it now. But it's the interesting part, and the thing that I wish that I could actually have a conversation with both of them about, is what happens when the medium starts talking. And we're not just using it as something that's transmitting something that's coming from others.
So one of the things that you guys talk about in your Cognitive Sovereignty and the Cube article, which I think is a great short read and recommend on your website, is this idea of the front face, letting AI into your process, the concept of doer, framer, catalyst, and partner. Can you give us an idea a little bit about what you're doing there in those frames, and how that's framing our relationship there?
Great. So there's three ways, if you like, that AI is changing us, that comes out of our research. It's intertwined with our reasoning and thinking, becomes part of our thinking, becomes part of our identity, and becomes part of our meaning making. And when you put those three together in three axes, you get 8 roles, which forms a cube. Now, the front face of that cube is all of those combinations, the 4 combinations that happen before identity is involved. So your identity stays very separate from how you work with AI. You don't think about any kind of level of dependency on AI. It's not changing your professional identity. You're not doing things in such a way that you become very bonded with the AI from an identity perspective. So it is purely about inside your reasoning, or inside your changing the way that you create meaning, or that your meaning making and frameworks change. So if you think about this, it's easier to think about without having identity, because thinking in 2 dimensions is easier than thinking in 3. So the bottom left corner of that, if you're used to 2x2s, and I'm sure most of your audience thinks in 2x2s, the bottom left is doer. It's when you're putting AI into the role of a doer, and it's not bound up in your reasoning at all. You're not changing any of your frameworks or meaning making. You generally are using AI to, not in a total one-shot way, but certainly in a way where it's short answers. It might be using an agent to go and do some sort of simple task for you, but it's very much a pure automation role, pure doer role.
Yeah.
And in our research, that is around 25-30% of people put AI into those doer roles for that sort of amount of time for those kinds of things. Once your reasoning starts to be, once AI is inside your reasoning and you go up on that reasoning spectrum and you move across to the bottom right, you're putting AI into a framer role. And the framer role is in the data the one that we see the most, sort of 33, 35%. In professional situations. And what's interesting about that is, and I think it'll appeal to people intuitively who use AI, is what you're doing is you're asking AI to help frame problems for you. You are doing give me 10 ideas for this, or give me a different perspective on this, or something like that. And that is it's a powerful place to be. And it's you feel much more productive, much faster, and because it's inside of your reasoning, you pick up ideas from AI in the same way that you sort of pick up ideas from people. So it's not surprising to me that that is a very common role that we put AI into. If you don't have it inside your reasoning, but it is shifting your meaning frameworks, then you're in the top left and you're placing AI into the role of a catalyst. And in that role as a catalyst, you are using it to really stretch what you think you might be able to do. and it gives you ideas in a different way. It's rather than framing something that then you take forward as a idea yourself within existing frameworks. What you're doing is give me a different framework for this. And your curation is more about whether that idea shifts your perspective on something that you can do. So that's why we call it a catalyst. And so it sparks ideas in people that that they want to test. They're really stretching into different roles. And we start to see this in a lot of creative work. So it's an interesting place to be. It's not especially common, but people dabble in it for reasons of like combining different ideas, and that takes them to another place. And they don't necessarily keep those ideas, but it shifts what they think matters to them.
Yeah.
And in the top right is the partner role, which is where you get a little bit of both. And a partner role is where you start to see a lot more back and forth, a lot more collaboration, keeping ideas, stretching ideas. But the important thing is that there isn't a sense of your identity shifting with this. It's very much that AI is still a tool. It becomes a different kind of useful tool. It's a place where you do start to feel like you kind of learn a lot. Now, what's interesting here is that people can get into that partner role, and then if they're not aware of losing something, losing a sense of choice, or they drift into a relationship with the AI, then they move out of that partner role and they move to the back part of the cube, where that identity starts to drive them into different parts of to having quite a different relationship with AI. So this is very early days, and it's quite early in the data to sort of see this. Some of this makes great intuitive sense, right? You know, these things feel natural when you describe them to people, and people recognize this. And I've had lots of people say, "Wow, yeah, you just named what I was feeling." And had someone say, "I've been wandering in the desert, and this is an oasis." You know, putting names on things matters. I think, though, we need to be humble, because there are actually some quite counterintuitive results that we're seeing. So you can be the people who have the highest cognitive sovereignty are actually those who are the most entangled with AI. Now, I wouldn't have expected that. So we say, well, why is that happening? And at this stage, I have to be, you know, perfectly honest and say, I think there's something there's a selection bias in the data, that the people who are the most aware of their AI relationship are the ones who want to talk about it. You know, the people who we're not seeing in the data are the people who don't want to talk about it. But I think that this is very interesting, because what it does show is that high cognitive sovereignty, being a really functioning, really expansive human, is possible with AI, and is actually better than being just someone who sits and presses a button and automates things and is just sitting there as a curator. So what starts as something sort of counterintuitive actually sort of matches the theory of how kind of humans work, and the intuitions that you might have about it, because it speaks to that your awareness of the roles you put AI into matters. The choices you have and the choices you make matter, because sometimes you don't have a choice. The boss says you have to use it, or the boss says you can't use it. Those are both restrictive on our own agency. And then there's the final one, which is actually the most important, is that the healthiest relationships with AI are actually the ones where you still have good relationships with humans, because accountability is what really underpins this cognitive sovereignty, because you have accountability is relational. You've got to step away from the AI and go back to talking to your human co-workers, who are the ones who expect you to be responsible, who expect you to be able to explain a decision. And it's that accountability that ends up drawing it sort of grounds that cognitive sovereignty.
Yeah. And it seems to me that obviously this is nonlinear, right? So you're moving, even in a single interaction with AI, you're moving perhaps through these. Maybe you're moving from one area to another and then back. Obviously the same thing happens with your own sovereignty.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, if it drafts a complete article for you, and all you're doing is maybe making some minor edits and submitting it, well, there's a sovereignty, even an accountability issue there.
Yeah,
and early on we saw some examples of that. In the other area we still see them. Yeah. And the other area that I see, that accountability piece, and human interaction, is when we start moving AI into this realm of being a guru, a relationship, a girlfriend, a boyfriend, a partner. What's happening there?
Well, there's a lot of people who are specifically collecting data on the vulnerabilities of this, the vulnerabilities of chatbots as partners, as lovers, as therapists. We're not focusing particularly on that specific use case. I do think that those use cases have a degree of, like, you really need to be an expert in that area to be able to fully critique that. But I can tell you what the kinds of things that we see, that the biggest one is that people get isolated, and that isolation means that they start to believe that they essentially know way more than they really do, because they're having that relationship with an or knowledgeable chatbot. So the sycophancy side of things has been sort of well discussed. The bit that we see that perhaps I don't see other people talking about much is what we talked about earlier in the podcast, which is this sort of clunkiness.
Yes.
That it is very clunky between people. That I think we talked about the fighting couple, right?
We did.
And that's an example of this sort of great misunderstanding. Both of them were right. They just had totally different sort of ideas of what was really going on. They were almost in different games, They were certainly playing by different rules. And I don't think that we're yet having discussions about how teams handle this. Like, there's a lot of discussions about how couples handle it, but there's not many discussions about how teams handle it. There's stuff about work slop, but there isn't much about, well, okay, so say you've got a group of people, and let's just take very simple, our very simple data profile that says, around 30% people are putting AI into doer roles, around 35% are putting it into framer roles, and the rest is a mix of other things with some outsources, which is, sort of a slightly problematic corner, where someone's really fully bonded in their identity with AI, but they've kind of detached in every other sense, which is a kind of an odd place to be. And what happens then is, you could take that group of people and you say, okay, so they're each putting things in different roles, putting the AI in different roles. So when they share their workflow now, or when they're accountable for different parts of their workflow, they're coming from quite different perspectives, and they're looking at different things, and they're worried about different things, and they're showing up for each other differently. So there's this layer of normality that we just haven't figured out how to deal with. Like, we have no norms for presenting those ideas or for critiquing those ideas. We don't really have a polite way of saying to someone, well, this looks like it just came from ChatGPT. We're all kind of bumbling through this. So that's really what we're focusing on our kind of practical level research is, what's the method to author your group and yourself as an individual. What's the method that we need to have as teams, so that across organizations we can actually bring these machines in. There's a narrative out at the moment that I think that people are falling into, which is, well, I'm just going to sit here as a human and I'm going to have all my agents go off and do things, and they'll talk to your agent, and then they'll come back and they'll give us humans the answer, and we'll sit at the end of the day, maybe between 5 and 5:15, and we'll say, look, my agent said this and my agent said that. Okay, well, we'll do that then. I mean, what a ridiculous idea. That is absolutely absurd. That goes against everything we know about how we operate in the world. And so I think there's this challenge right now where people have sort of conflated having teams of agents or lots of different chats in AI. They've conflated the agency of those agents with the agency of the human machine system as a whole.
Totally.
And there's so much research from automation, whether it be automation bias or my field that I understand from my career, which is how do you manage increasing automation in critical human decision-making, like in critical infrastructure? How do you manage a situation where people with more automation, people are monitoring more, but their expertise is declining because they're not actually engaged? So this comes back to what we were talking about before and sort of closes the loop. If you've got, let's just make it simple, half your people are doers and half your people are framers, in terms of, that's a shortcut way of saying putting AI in the role of, but that's a mouthful. So I'm just going to say doers and framers. You got half and half. Your doers don't have any cognition bound up with AI. They are sitting there kind of going, yes, no, they're doing the light edits on the email, or they're pressing, a button, literally. That's kind of that human in the loop idea where the human's sort of not, they're just checking, right? Whereas in the framer role, you have your cognition bound with the AI. So in a framer role, you're staying actively engaged. You're not just pushing that out. So that this idea of agency with agents actually requires humans to still not just be in the loop, but to be fully bound in this cognition, to be engaged, to be in that at least framer role. And I think this is the bit that people are kind of missing the point on, in that the agency of the system as a whole is what matters, not just this fleet of agents going off doing stuff and bringing back answers. That's a snapshot in time. We'll get past that conversation because people will realize that our brains don't work very well at monitoring. We're just not very good at sitting and paying attention and monitoring. It's like saying, why don't you just sit and meditate? How much can you count your breath? And there isn't a single, well, there are obviously meditation gurus, but most people say, I can't count my breath more than 10, Right. My mind wanders because that's what we do.
Yeah. It seems like in many respects, we're just right back to the same issue of how do we bring human beings back to the conversation, or even into a conversation about what it is to be human, whether that be within the workplace or within the tools we're using or within the interaction that we're having with this incredibly powerful artificial intelligence. And once again, within workplaces and industry, we aren't properly addressing that simple human element.
Yeah, well, and I think there's an obvious reason right now for that, which is there's a lot of change. The pace of change is really high. The easiest thing to do is to focus on the things that you know. But the warning is that efficiency has a ceiling, and you're going to hit it. But capability has no ceiling. There's absolutely nothing that says that we don't have infinite capabilities. That's David Deutsch's argument, right? That our brains are general intelligences to the point that we can understand anything in the universe. I'm not so sure about that, but I'm not David Deutsch. I think that maybe we can understand everything in the universe if we attach AI to it as well. But that's sort of going down like a philosophical rabbit hole.
And I think there's a
Right.
historical analogy in some ways that if you remember, back to the mid-late 90s, the internet came along, and what did we do with it first is replicated stuff that we had done before.
Right.
So we took this new technology and people put their brochures up on the internet, and literally sometimes it would be just an image that they posted on their website. And it was literally just the image file that they used to print on a piece of paper. So
That's
it was
right.
unimaginative use of a brand new technology because nobody figured out what to do with it yet. And in
Yeah.
some ways, that's a decent analogy to what we're doing now. We've got this new intelligence. So what do? Well, we assign it to do things that humans already do,
Right.
because those are the things that we can identify that we know need to be done. So let's take an intelligence and put it on those tasks, but that's still lacking the imagination of doing something that couldn't be done before. Right. And it took a
Yeah.
while for the internet to really get to the point of being able to do something that we couldn't do elsewhere, that there was no capability of doing without the internet. And we still have sort of yet to get to that next set of possibilities, because we need to sort of slow down enough to apply some imagination to figure out what that might be.
That's a really great point, Dave. And I think that I think maybe one of the pieces of concern there is that the things that were novel in the early days of the internet, that were game changers, that were technology advancers, they were elements of human behavior that were wrapped around desire in many respects.
Sure.
Whether that was food or that was pornography, or whereas information was kind of our first go-to, right? You're right. The first websites were literally the print brochure that you had a designer do. And so if you translate that into this, it's probably going to end up being very similar if we're not very careful. And I don't know that we're currently equipped as Homo sapiens to be very careful.
Yeah. Well, and some of the basic commerce of the original internet was kind of like that. I mean, eBay originally was like you'd gone to a fair and you were just sort of buying something off of somebody at a used stand of Beanie Babies, which was the
Yeah.
major thing. It took a while to get to the commerce angle that allowed for, to reserve currency when they created and absorbed PayPal, to have that kind of those were all things that were created to enable something that was totally new. Search initially was essentially a library catalog of the websites that were on the internet, and the people who created them, and they were organized in that sort of structured way according to topic, because we were replicating, how do I go find a whole bunch of information that's in this thing and I don't really know what's there, so I have to organize it. And it wasn't really a Dewey Decimal System, but it wasn't that far off
It wasn't that far off, right?
from having
Yeah.
that. And then Google came along and went, well, wait a second, we can organize stuff based on what everybody else is looking at
Yes.
and what everybody else is referring to. That literally was not possible without the internet. So it took several years to get to that point of going, oh, wait, there might be a new way of doing this based on this new thing that gives us new capabilities. I actually think that AI has there will be a vastly larger number of new things that we can do with this tool and this technology, as long as we take the time and apply the imagination to figure out how to do things that we've never considered before.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah, I
the
think-
partner, in the cube, it's the partners, which is that top right. And then if you go to the back part of the cube where the identity coupling happens, and the bonding, it's the co-authors, it's the people who are really so entangled. But there's a price to pay for that, and the price to pay for that is eternal vigilance.
Yes. Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And I think that where we're not equipped, and it shows this in the data within our relationships with for-profit social media platforms, with everything that's changed since 2008, really, and the rise of the algorithm on the back end. We don't teach in our K-12 education, or even in our higher education, we don't teach the recursive ability to create feedback loops within yourself. So here's this thing that's creating a feedback loop with us. What are you interested in? What do you like? What are you looking at? And our job on the other end is pure reaction. And so we don't teach the tools of self-reflection, self-awareness, self-regulation, and ongoing self-inquiry. We teach the tools of certainty and of acquiring answers. And I think going forward, if we're going to co-evolve, and be in the driver's seat with this technology, we are going to have to learn a new way of being in the world.
Yeah, well, I agree with you. And you can't set a goal without knowing where you're coming from. So
Yes.
that self-reflection and self-awareness is critical. I would add to that, I guess, a personal sensitivity that I'm developing more, probably as I get older. That, and also just being embedded in the US when I didn't grow up here. There's a cultural overlay of self everything. Like it's a self society.
Yes,
And
it is.
so, thoughtful people will immediately see beyond everything about being about self-reflection and realize that they're talking about the broader connection with others, that it is, we cannot, everything about our intelligence is relational. It's about how I relate to you. It's about how I relate to him. It's about how I relate to the dog. We're not isolated brains. And I myself, if there's one thing I've changed, it's being more willing to call that out, to actually just make sure that I say, when I'm talking about self-awareness, in my mind, I've smuggled in all these assumptions about my relationship to other people, but I'm now going to say it because I don't think it's said enough in the West in general and in the US particularly, and it's hitting even more self.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. The fierce independence of the American identity is still very much with us, despite the rapid changes over the past 20 years socially.
Yeah, and amplified by the superhero culture, right? And so there's a lot of that mindset behind how these tools are developed and how they're explained and marketed is that use this tool and it's going to make you the superhero, right? There's the idea that there's going to be a single person that will build a company that's worth $1 billion, right?
Yes.
And there it's
only the US could have come up.
Only the US could have come up with that.
At least everywhere else in the world, there might be one other.
And a
person.
Generation that was consumed by the Iron Man movies, right? It's
Yeah.
it's literally a Tony Stark kind of mindset. Whereas
it is.
A lot has changed in the world in the last few years, the last 50 years, but our evolution has not changed, right? Like we are still entirely cultural and connected species. That is the only reason why humans have been so successful, because we're really useless individually. And I know that people think that they could be the Tony Starks, but just take a wander in the wilderness for a little while, and we live near one of the great wilderness areas in the United States, and if you go in there too long, you won't make it out, right? So we depend on each other. That connectivity of everything, physical, emotional, mental, is what keeps our species, intact.
And I don't think we even really understand it. It very well. Dave wrote an essay a few months ago about the metaphor of the Dust Bowl and human connection. And time will tell. But one of the things that AI does consistently is make reasoning more precise over things that we didn't have such good reasoning for until we tried to put it into math. And now the great microscope that's going on to the human condition is one of our connection with others. And over, I think, the next 5 years, there'll be quite a massive revolution in how we can what we find out that's below the surface that we just don't even know about. in terms of how we
Yes.
connect with others. You know, there's interesting new fields of science around the science of care, you know, how we care for others, and let's try and understand that more. There's the science of synchrony, how our heart rates synchronize, and you know, these all sounded kind of like hand wavy and wacky and a bit new agey, or something that, you know, old women do, caring for
Right.
grandchildren. But oh my God, do we really need to understand this stuff or what?
Yes, we
Becoming
do.
an old woman, proudly.
Yeah. Yeah, we do. You know, I mean, I write on synchronicity a lot, and it's a field of research for me, and it has come so far
It
in
has. It's
a
fascinating.
short amount of time. Yeah.
Fascinating.
And research on connection, research on consciousness, this research is advancing, and you know what, AI's a part of that advancement.
Sure.
It is.
Much so.
And if you took AI out of the equation, we would probably lose interest in some of those things.
We
But now
probably would.
someone wants to monetize them, and someone wants to put them into an algorithm, and all of a sudden we're able to mobilize some resources and study them. And yeah, it would have been nice to do it the old-fashioned way, but I'll take it. I think this is really interesting stuff.
It's kind of funny.
Yeah.
We first formed our first AI company, 10 years ago when we were studying it. It was a research business studying AI. And we, at one point, I think our tagline was something along the lines of exploring the human machine community. And that was so far out there and sort of definitely in the category of woo that we left it behind at one point.
I'm gonna push back on that. I think it was just so early it was wrong.
I think what I'm saying is it was interpreted. I should have said it was interpreted as woo. But now if you said it, people would be like, yeah,
I've got an agent that's doing that,
exactly.
building that. That's my
Right.
startup.
Well, that's what Multibook is actually a community just of machines,
Yeah.
the human, I don't know how
There's
many
plenty
humans
of
are behind.
humans in there
Yes.
too, yeah.
But it is interesting. I think community is the thing, and it is what is important, but it's just sort of now we're getting to the point of that becoming a reality that people can see. Where you show up and you say, and we'll probably all experience some of this, that we're in email threads or communities or whatever, and people post, well, this is what Claude said back to me, and they
Right.
copy paste and they drop it right in. Well, that voice is now being brought in. It's like, well, my buddy said,
Yes.
like it wouldn't
Yep.
be weird if I showed up and I said, my friend Jeremy told me this and I wrote it in. That would be a
That's
normal
right.
part of a human conversation, other than that people are like, well, who is that guy and why do I care? But
Yeah.
but if you drop it in with a machine, we're like, I don't know what to do with that right now. Like, do I read it? Do I not read it? What does it mean for this machine and this form of intelligence to be a participant in this community and in this conversation? We don't have any norms for that. We clearly have not evolved to figure out how to include that in our society, but it's rapidly becoming part of it.
Yeah, I mentioned to you earlier that a community I'm currently a part of is a grad school community as I go through a dissertation process. And last spring, my wife started using chat first. I started seeing some of the like I saw a draft article that she was getting ready to post, and I went to her and I said, "Hey, did you use AI to write this?" And she was like, "How did you know?" And I was like, "Because it's terrible," and so the two of us have been using it ever since. What's interesting to me is that within the graduate studies community, there was a myriad of opinions last spring as far as the use of AI.
Mm-hmm.
I was very open and very bold with I'm going to use this. It's going to bump up against the policy. We're going to have to navigate this, and it would be better if we could have a dialogue. And slowly but surely, that dialogue has emerged both with students and with faculty and staff, so that I can now say, yeah, I ran that through chat and built out this whole idea on my lit review that I was working on, and then took it back out and rewrote it. Well, I can say that now because we've created a circle where at least somebody can say, I don't know, did you go too far with that? Did you not go far enough? Because we don't really know how to hold this space for this other entity.
this other entity. And when we're dealing with writing, we already have so many different norms that I think people kind of forget.
Mm.
Like we both worked at courts and wrote for them when it was part of Atlantic Media. And the vast majority of what we wrote, this was all before generative AI, so there wasn't the option of using it. The vast majority of what we wrote was written by us, but guess what? Everything that we wrote was ran through editors. And there's times
Yeah.
when editors put a light touch, sometimes they put a heavier touch.
Sometimes they send it back to you and say, I have no idea.
I have no idea what
to do with
I
it.
write it again.
What is
Sometimes
this?
I'd write something and I'd pass it through her because we were co-authoring. Sometimes I would
Yeah.
just pass it through her, it would come out of my byline, but she wrote a new paragraph in the middle. That's all normal. But if, for instance, your child is writing an essay for an application to college, you're really not supposed to touch that writing.
That's
They're
right.
definitely not supposed to take it to their English teacher and have them edit it and
That's
restructure
right.
it for them, right? So writing and what it means when you think about, you could write an opinion piece and have opinions that are things that you recall that somebody said over dinner or something that came from a lecture in college that you don't really remember. And that's okay. It's your opinion. You can talk about it. If you're an academics in a setting and you're writing an academic paper, you have to source those things, right?
You
There's an
do.
authenticity of where that idea originated from. You have to go back and find it again, but different forms of writing for different forms of delivery have different expectations of what it means to be mine.
Mm.
Marketing copy. Who cares, right? Like it's just
Right.
like the copy on a website. Like, did you write it or did somebody else write it or whatever? So all of these things are so varying in the human only, world. Now we have to sort of stop and rethink what it means when a machine can also be a writer or an editor or a sparring partner when you're trying to develop an idea or
Yes.
a research assistant that might go off and find some sources. May or may not be a very good one at finding the sources, but
Getting
you know,
better.
I do like having, bringing in voices and ideas from the past that I couldn't access myself. And
Yeah.
so it just sort of bantering ideas about, well, what would Heidegger think about this? That kind of a thing is like kind of cool and it kind of sparks new ideas in my own mind.
Yeah.
So there's lots of different ways to do it, but we don't have established norms for it yet. So people are tripping over themselves trying to figure out what's right or not. And
Yeah.
over time, our culture will find some groove, and it likely won't be the same groove for all different forms of writing, all different forms of image creation, video creation, etc. There will be some new mixture of things across different media, but we don't know what that is yet.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, we are definitely in some exciting territory. I thought maybe we could round out with this idea of what sovereignty actually looks like. You've got four aspects here, and I think that um, given kind of where we're going here, that would be a good place to land this.
Well, yeah, the cube with the 8 roles, what cognitive sovereignty is 3 things. The first is awareness, which we've talked about quite a bit. The second one, but awareness can show up in different ways. Awareness can be, oh shit, didn't realize I did that. There's an error there, is a mistake. But it can also be, awareness going in. This is the kind of interaction I want to have. This is how I'm using AI. This is the kind of person I want to be. That kind of awareness.
Mm-hmm.
Agency. So your choices. And sometimes those choices are constrained. The boss tells you have to use it. The boss tells you you're not allowed to use it. But there's other choices like I really want to experiment with a more expansive way of using AI today. I want to create something new. I want to automate something, or so I can, be more present for other people. Those kinds of things. So the choice, and the third one, which is accountability, the relational aspect of how you show up. And so it's those 3 things that sum up to authorship, which we sort of say is the same as cognitive sovereignty. But authorship is a more expansive term. It gives an arc across your life. Being the author of your own mind. Cognitive sovereignty, when you say that to an academic, oh boy, they love it. Higher ed is like, oh yeah. And it contrasts so nicely with cognitive surrender. Right. So,
Yeah.
but we do use it interchangeably and definitionally the same as with human authorship. But human authorship is human. It relates to the concept of the right that you have to a future tense, to not have predictive technologies reduce your level of the cone of who you can be, and whether that's about the cone of care, the cone of goals that you want to undertake. We want that to be expanded, and we want to be able to increase the sense of purpose that we have in our lives. And the purpose in our lives is kind of driven by the kinds of goals that we get to set and how we go about achieving them. That's what gives us a sense of purpose and mattering. And that is why we talk about human authorship as sort of a broader concept, even though we tend to be a bit interchangeable with terms. But it's those three things, your awareness, your accountability, and the agency you have.
Yeah. So, I mean, honestly, grounding yourself right here in, at the center of this three-dimensional reality that you are a pinpoint in time and space with.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You guys have a conference coming up in October, and I think it looks incredibly exciting in Bend, Oregon. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. It will be our third Artificiality Summit. This year it's October 22nd to the 24th, so it's sort of 2.5 days. We open on a Thursday night, and we have dinner together, and we have opening presentations, and then the following 2 days, Friday and Saturday, are full 12-hour days. We gather, we talk. It's very immersive. We have some presentations that are a bit sort of deep thinking lectures, others that are very immersive, long conversations. We have interesting activities, and we are up in the mountains of Bend. We dine together. We have beautiful food from our favorite local restaurants.
Nice.
The whole point of this is to be a human gathering. So it's unlike, it's not a tech gathering. It's not a tech conference in that way. It's not a sales place. It's not a deal place. It's a place to come and explore what it means to be human. And so we bring people together who have strong understanding and deep understanding of AI at the cutting edge of what that's going to be. We bring together philosophers and psychologists and neuroscientists and biologists and designers and artists. We have great music that is performed live by an actual individual. Check out the reel on our website. If you go to artificialityinstitute.org/summit, you'll get a good sense of Billy and his cello, which is a really fantastic performance. We are about to announce the first slate of people who are speaking soon. So depending on when this hits the interwebs, you should be able to see who will be coming this year. But it's a fantastic experience. We've been told it's everything like being at the first TED, the first Royal Society, and the first Burning Man, and the last of which always makes us laugh a bit.
It's quite a Venn diagram.
It's kind of Venn diagram of experiences. But we're quite...
It's the highlight of our year.
It is the highlight of our year, and it is something that we're quite proud to say that people say changes their mind, changes their world, and people often say that they feel like they finally found their tribe.
That's awesome.
So that's really meaningful to us.
And people always want to move to Bend.
Yes. So
yes, of course.
It is a spectacular place to be. So yeah, we're very excited. This will be really a very interesting group of people that we're gathering. Some of whom coming as far from Europe and from the South Pacific. So it'll be an interesting global perspective.
Awesome. Give me let's let folks know where they can reach you. Are there certain platforms that you prefer to places you write? Certainly your website, which you've given once, but feel free to
on the
give it
website, go to the website, as I said, artificialityinstitute.org, and click on journal, and that'll take it all of our writing. It goes back several years. It includes the 2 books, one of which Helen's finished. The second one's publishing chapter by chapter, and future ones that are still in draft. You can easily find us on LinkedIn and reach out. We love to connect with people, so find us there. And you can find long and short form videos on YouTube and short forms on Instagram and on TikTok. And in particular, check it out now. Helen's doing a whole long series of short videos, which are really quite helpful in helping people find new ways of framing the moment we're living through.
Particularly around jobs,
Yes.
given that it's a sort of scary topic, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But we kind of lived through the first wave of this in 2016, and this is much bigger as a big deal. But we talked about that a little bit earlier in the podcast. But the short videos that are bite-sized pieces about just more nuanced ways to think about the economy and jobs and your role in it and humans' role in it. That's my goal at the moment, is to try and shift this discourse a little bit. It's just too focused on competition with machines and human obsolescence.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you're doing, I follow you. I think you're doing a great job. I appreciate your shorts, and, let's keep this conversation going. Your dialogue has definitely influenced some of my own research and the conversations I'm writing about. So greatly appreciate both of you. Dave and Helen, thank you for being here. I really appreciate it.
Of course.
Great.
Thank you very much for having us.
Thank you for having us on.
Yeah. Everyone, thank you so much for joining this episode of the Plowline podcast. And if you want to keep in touch with what we're doing, you can go to the evolutionofaloha.com, where Jerry's work on aloha and the power of ha and the guiding principles of aloha are taking place, and co3consulting.net, where our learning and development and leadership development courses can be found. We're also on LinkedIn. I've recently started a Substack /Jeremy Tunnell. And if you want to contribute and be a part of everything that we're doing, you can go to patreon.com/Plowline Productions. Thanks again for joining us. Chat with you both soon.
Thank you.
Okay. Awesome. I think
Great.
that synced up pretty smooth.